On. Hey, Zach, can you hear us okay from the room here?
It sounds great.
Awesome. Hello there.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Everyone. Sandy, thank you for coming in. Appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. I had a few things I needed to do.
Yes.
Hey, how
How
are
are
you?
you? I'm great. How are you?
It is,
What's his?
have a
Thank you,
seat,
Ian.
making sure things work, I guess.
How are you guys
Yeah, we're
doing?
getting
Good, how about you?
everything
Good.
set up and.
Wonderful.
We'll go every
Is
other.
there anyone offsite that'll be
Spread out a
calling
little
in?
bit.
We'll be doing the Zoom.
Just this
What?
WebEx?
Yeah,
about just
Okay,
one.
so
Is
they'll
it a
just
Zoom?
connect
Can
into
we
the
do
WebEx.
Zoom?
No, it's
I didn't think we could
it's
do
WebEx.
Zoom. It's WebEx.
So Zach's on right now. This call's gonna be streaming out. I have us unmuted now just because we're talking to Zach, but
Okay.
feel free.
Yeah.
No, it's WebEx.
And they all have the link, they've been sent it a couple times, so.
Okay.
Yeah,
The food looks good.
It smells
it's
wonderful.
always,
There's two different chilies, I think one is 3 bean and the
oh
other
my
one is
God.
turkey maybe, I think.
We're in the fall,
then-
we get chili.
I know, it's cold out, so.
Wonderful.
You get a press coffee?
They're nice. Oh, yay.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ian,
Yeah,
for being here.
absolutely.
I really appreciate it.
Anytime, pleasure.
Just, yeah, I'm
I'll be here.
Okay.
You'll be
I'll
here.
be here, Hollyford.
Okay. I'm leaving after.
3, 4, it just depends, I've got.
Okay.
It's nice to come in and be quiet.
I know, yeah.
It actually
It
gets
is.
a lot done.
Okay. I'm gonna get
And by the way, Zach, I should have the YouTube stream should be going already.
Yeah.
I guess you'll make it
Yeah,
live.
the
Who's the
Time to
third
go.
one?
Okay.
Art?
Yeah, I actually just texted Mary, so it is live right now.
Just you. Okay. Cool. I'll leave the room on mute here for now, just because everyone's probably going to be getting food, shuffling around, and chit chatting. So,
Okay, sounds good.
all right, cool.
Thanks so much, Ian.
buried, right?
If we have time afterwards, I'll tell you what I did find down there. Funny thing, okay, so,
Art, where are you
let me
teaching
see, I
this
see
week?
Zach Ryder, Ryan
Randolph
Barber,
Macon and University of Richmond this semester.
Two
DB
schools?
Poley.
Oh, I've always
Wait a
taught
minute.
it two
And
schools.
who's-
The rub this year is I'm teaching 3 courses instead of 2.
At both?
Yes.
No, just
I don't know
all
who
together.
U2 is.
2 at U of R and 1 at Randolph Macon.
That's
It's
a lot.
Ryan.
It is.
It's not
Why
Ryan,
two
sorry.
schools?
Ryan's on the right.
That's one of the things you do when you're an adjunct. You just sort of, and I do that because it gives me
Could that be
flexibility.
this room?
I'm front loading my
Could be.
courses this academic year so I can have most of the spring off.
Just has a
Off
code.
to South Texas for a month. First spring I've had off in decades.
Oh, that'd be nice.
So, even teaching during the winter session at one school. So.
I was out most of the summer, and even when I was well, it was hard for me to decide to come back because I was so relaxed.
Yeah,
You know,
We can find out who that
and-
U2 number
healthy,
is.
not healthy,
I can
but
change
yeah.
the name.
mentally healthy,
all summer
rested.
lost weight, slept better,
Yeah,
and then a week before school kicked in, 10 pounds.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
My
Yeah, because
sleep-
you had been dropping.
Oh, that's my usual thing.
Oh, okay.
Summertime, I'll get down to 250. And I'm fighting up to 270, 275 by New Year's.
Thank you, sir.
There's a
Mix up the
story
coffee
on
and water.
NPR as I was
You
driving
I'm
this
good,
morning
thanks.
about living a long time. And they said one of the best things you can do is retire early because just working it just kills you. Just
Well,
does.
we're hurtling toward that. We have a date in mind.
Good.
It will change a lot of things. All for the better, I hope.
I can retire in a year. I don't know if
Are
I
you
will.
going to retire?
I don't know if I will, but I can. I don't know. But it's nice to have that in your head that you can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got it in my head. I don't think it's gonna happen.
I thought it was interesting. Our financial advisor, I've always worried about it. I figure as long as Paula could retire, I'll keep slogging along. And he says, no, when you guys are ready, do what you want to do. And he says, the real question is, are you ready to be retired?
Yeah.
We both looked at each other and laughed out loud.
Yeah. No way.
There's a lot to do out there in the world.
So
Got a lot to do at home too. I have
Yeah.
a collection that's been neglected for years.
Yeah.
well, volunteer opportunities and just working and doing something completely different.
I just found a website that they coordinate adult. It isn't solely retirees, but it's one of the groups that they cater to. And they will assign you to volunteer opportunities, like on farms and things like that, where you get room and board.
Is it roofing?
Huh?
Roofing?
No,
You
no, it's something
man,
X.
because
Okay.
it's nuts.
I'm not going
You have to have three
of it, but it's just one example of many that
No,
you
no,
find
that-
we
this
know
works
that,
for me.
a lot of these
I'm
cases,
pretty
all you're
flexible.
responsible for is about
Because I
4
work for
hours
myself,
worth
so
of
I can
whatever
sort
it is you're
of
doing.
most times pick
And,
my
you know,
hours.
for the most part, it's
So-
kind of entertainment,
Yeah,
a
I've got
chance to
mornings
travel,
till
to
about
contribute.
10:30, and then I've got
you know,
Fridays and weekends, that's it.
My girlfriend and I have a plan. She's gonna get a job at Hilton and I'm gonna get a job at Delta.
Oh,
That way we have
yeah.
free
Yeah.
airfare, free hotels.
Yep.
And it could be a mindless job, but we'll be able to travel for free-ish.
Yeah.
Where will that be?
Richmond.
In Richmond.
I'm not gonna be a
Yeah, it
baggage
makes sense
handler,
for
but I
me
could
to
do a lot of other
Teach
things.
as much as I can in Richmond. They pay
Well, after all the exercise
twice
you get
as
near the
much
fire
as
drills,
Richmond
maybe you will be.
and 3 times as much as VCU. I found
Yeah,
teaching there, it's terrible.
This is awesome.
it's a more pleasant.
So we're waiting
atmosphere.
for Sandy, right?
Sherry.
Sherry, sorry.
Yeah,
It is 11:30.
it's a nice
Do
facility.
they make it easy for you? They give you nice parking and all that kind of stuff, or?
Yeah, there is parking.
Yeah.
I mean, and I get my steps in too. I
Yeah.
park out in the boot
I believe
box.
so.
Yeah.
Walk in.
Well,
Yeah.
there's always
stuff.
Yeah.
Is Roberto on?
I say I'm
There you go.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
just
he's
doing.
on.
I'm active with a couple of things that are going on.
Hey, Roberto.
over there, but
Oh, there's Barbara.
It's
She's
just-
joined in. So hi, Barbara.
every year my degree from there is worth more.
Sherry Phillips is like right
It
across.
wasn't worth nearly as much when I graduated.
Right.
I called it investment.
Exactly. Other people's money investment really is
Yeah,
what
right.
built it. Yeah, I was there the first year that Robin's money came in, so
Oh,
that was a big deal. It was before that building was on the lake, wasn't even there.
mhm.
You had to swim the lake to get on a date, you know?
Boys on one side, girls on the other.
Yeah.
Contrast that with my college. The dorms were co-ed by
Yeah.
room. And there's a room of boys, room of girls, room of boys, room of girls. Flip sign for the bathroom.
I never lived on campus.
Yeah. A couple of years.
Should we start, even though it's 11:30?
I think at least it counts, right, as a part to a quorum, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's ex officio on all committees.
Yeah, I think we might as well start, right?
Mhm.
So,
Can everyone hear us on the screen?
hello?
I'll just shut the
Cool.
door. Sometimes that helps us out. Oh, you got it.
Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for fitting this into your schedule. I know we were back and forth with times. Maybe is that Sherry?
No.
Okay. I've got quite a bit to go through today, but I think that we have plenty of time to make that work and have built that into the schedule. I'd like to start off by calling the meeting to order, and I think as we look across the room, do we need to take the roll, or just we can basically say we have a quorum, so we're ready to go.
And I think we should introduce
Yeah.
Barbara.
Yeah, so Barb,
I'd like to introduce Barbara Truman, who has connected. She's online with us. So she's one of our relatively new foundation board members. She is an employee at Eastman. So she's a great addition to the foundation board, and this will be her first meeting.
welcome, Barbara. Okay. Prior meeting, the last meeting we did not have a quorum, and while we had notes of the meeting, there were not minutes, so there will not need to be any approval of minutes from the last discussion. So I'd like to move on to my comments and sort of introduction to today's discussions. First of all, Sherry, who will be with us shortly, and Art, welcome to the committee officially, and great to have you on board, and thank you, Lisa, for what you're doing here today and allowing us to be at Dominion. It's really helpful for all of us. I'd like to start by just having a very simple review of the committee's purpose, because it's often the case that we can easily get off track because we're all excited about different things the museum is up to and opportunities we have. But this committee is most focused on the longer-term goals of the museum, including the planning of those longer-term goals. And we'll go into more details of what those are today, as well as the immediate future goals that are upcoming and issues that could surround them. So we're not necessarily here to get into any tactical discussions about how we're going to make X or Y or Z happen, but more importantly, be focused on the things that are the big picture for this operation and look to the staff to tell us where they would like additional input from the committee or the board and depend upon the implementation going downstream a bit. So I think that's important to sort of put into perspective before we even start today. Doesn't mean we can't discuss it. It probably just is, it's not really part of our purpose, okay? So today, the committee is really guided by the last 5-year plan. And that one was from 2020 to 2025, going from, I think, May 1 to the next 5 years down the road from that. So as we'll discuss today, we're getting ready to go into a new 5-year period, but I think I wanted to start off by just a short review, and I think Joe provided us with a document as well, a short review of where we are in the 5-year plan we're in right now, which is, time-wise coming to a close, but there are many items in there that will continue, and we're in right now, which is, time-wise coming to a close, but there are many items in there that will continue into the next period. So, Joe, can you just sort of give us a brief overview of what's going on there?
Yeah, you have the bulleted list that Mary Zell had sent out. I just want to point out that one thing to keep in mind is that there's going to be some bleed over from the current strategic plan to when we start the new one. The 3 basic projects where we weren't sure of what the timeline was back in 2019, 2020 was going to be the VMNH Waynesboro campus. That, of course, we got the funding for detailed design, so we've been pushing through that. The second one is going to be the Early Childhood Learning Center. That is the renovation of the library space to a childhood gallery. That's something we're now calling the Young Explorers Center. We're ready to move on that, but there is still some decisions to be made about funding that whole process. And that library is not going to move until our Douglas Avenue facility's completed with its rehab. And then the last one that was kind of open-ended was the canopy walk. That was one that's a rather ambitious reach. The idea was to explore its possibility and try to create some kind of roadmap to move forward. So while we won't have those as completed projects in 2025, those are projects that could be included and probably should be included in some capacity in the next strategic plan. All else has gone well with the strategic plan. I'll just point out, and I mentioned casually to the folks present here, that Jonathan actually found a way to expedite some of the work on the Douglas Avenue facility. Quick review there. Douglas Avenue is the old building the museum was born in. We've retained that building. We have now decided to fix it up with maintenance reserve funds. We recently did the roof, we recently did the drainage. We are working with contractors now to start the replacement of doors and windows. The remainder of it, instead of doing it piecemeal, we'll be doing the HVAC, plumbing, electric. Am I missing anything, Jonathan?
Just insulation.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, insulation and so forth. That will all be done with one contractor, thanks to Jonathan. So that will hopefully get started in the next fiscal year. So
Are we keeping, it's a question, factual question, are we keeping the inside design exactly the way it is for now? We're just fixing it up the way it's structured?
right now, we're making sure that we can maintain a proper environment in there for long-term collection storage. What we do next, beyond moving collections over there, like the library, like some areas of museum collections that are overflowing, right, that remains to be seen. And certainly, if there's a desire to knock out doors and walls and so forth, that can be a
But
discussion.
the way
down
we're
the line.
fixing it up is every room, and the way it's currently designed, every room will be heated, AC,
Yes.
plumbed, whatever.
So maintenance reserve brings a building back to the state it was when it was built, right? It doesn't improve upon the way it was before, right? So this is a matter of just making sure that we can create a proper temperature and humidity environment for
Across the whole footprint. Okay.
across the entire footprint.
Thank you.
And that's why we spend a lot of money on the roof as well,
Yep.
right?
Yeah,
Yep.
that's exactly right.
Yep.
Good.
So if we want to do anything like knock out walls or create door or whatever, that's
That'll be a
later.
special project later.
Yep.
And I suspect that we'll be going into more detail on each of these things as we get to our next trustees meeting next month. So, if you have some specific questions for Joe on this, we're happy to entertain them now, or we can wait and go into more detail in November. But anybody? Okay,
I
great.
just wanted to understand.
Sure, good. Those of us in the room, I'm going to give you some set of papers here to go through. We're going to go through now. And those of you online have got a copy of this already. It was sent to you yesterday. So the next part of our discussion is really talking about, hey Sherry. The next part of our discussion is really talking about how we will construct the next 5-year plan. So I will say out front that I apologize for anything that's patronizing in this discussion, but I think it's important that we come back again to the committee's purpose as really long-term focused and trying to give that guidance and process to the strategic plan, because 5 years is a long time to think about in building a plan. So many things can happen. We're, almost a year and a half away from the beginning of the next 5-year plan, and we all know what's happened on this planet in the last 12 months, much less 24 months. So I want to go through these charts, and then please, as we go through, if there's any questions, we can entertain them as we go through. The first one really is just a reminder to all of us of what our charter says, the purposes of this museum are. And the box to the right we are considering that our current 5-year plan already addresses or has aspects of those purposes in its construction. And as we go forward into the next plan, we will have to think about how we either increment that effort in that particular purpose, drop it down in importance, or keep it the same level. And I think that is sort of from 50,000 feet, an important thing to keep in mind as we start the process, right? So I don't know that I need to go through and read each one of these, but I think it's important that you look at them and understand them, because there is some carryover from item to item, but there are very specific pieces that are important to understand. So, I think our current plan certainly takes this into account, in the future one as well. And as Joe mentioned, we're going to have carryover from one to the other as well. So, I think the beauty of this committee is we've got people that have ties into various pieces through their other committee assignments that are parts of these purposes that will help us to advocate on behalf of others. And as we talk about the next steps in the process, we'll talk about how we're going to get that input from other people. Any comments in general? I think this is pretty, again, it may be a little patronizing, but I think it's important to really understand what the basis is.
Mark, could I provide
Yeah.
a little perspective?
Sure.
The beauty of these purposes from the Code of Virginia are that, as I've gone through these, I go through these kind of regularly. I mean, I was told since day one, if there's a problem at your agency, revert back to the Code of Virginia to help with your decision making. So I think it's nice when you read through this and you think about some of our newest initiatives. So you might think of things like in education, our distance learning. When you think about the Cultural Heritage Monitoring Lab and its global mission, when you think about the establishment of our molecular lab, all of those can fit, I think, very nicely into these 6 purposes. So while Mark, I think, is correct in saying this kind of gives us that 50,000-foot view, it has been an effective tool to ensure what we're doing is relevant to our mission and our purpose.
Thanks, Joe. So as we move to sort of the next slide again, I think I know through many years in a corporate environment, and I'm sure in other areas and disciplines it's the same, trying to understand the difference between goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics is always been a difficulty. And in general, this is how you'll find them defined in the bold comments, but I've tried to sort of throw into this how a particular example might work at VMNH, and then our focus is really, as we go forward, is going to be in the middle of this chart because the goals are set for us. So in addition to the 6 purposes on that first slide, in the charter, they make 2 very important points that I think I've laid out here in that first box, and that is, we're declared to be a public body and instrumentality for the purpose of preserving and protecting natural history. But I think it's really interesting, the second one, is that the exercise of the powers conferred by this code shall be deemed an essential government function. So the state has determined that this museum is an essential function. And so as we are essential in addressing what the state wants, being responsive to the state is also important, right? So as we walk through this, and so for an example, I've said, okay, what is one of the objectives we could have? And objectives are things that are measurable, right? How do you look at it, measure it, and decide whether you've done a good job? So obviously, it's my colleague to the right's job to make sure we maintain a positive cash flow every year based on our funding, and that's how we measure that. So as we construct this plan, we'll construct strategies, and we'll also construct and recommend some objectives of how they'll be measured so that the board can come back and say, we're on target for this 5-year plan. So a strategy that supports that is maybe a little bit broader, right? And so establish a program that brings sources of income from our public funding and perhaps other constituencies that could supplement that. So that would be one of the strategies. And then the tactics of the staff to bring that together and be able to measure it and decide how they're doing. You know, they could have tasks such as building a budget and reading that budget and reviewing it and making sure they understand where they are. They could have specific number of initiatives related to funding. They could be doing grants. But I mean, the tactics are at the very bottom, and that's really something that the staff will help to put together. That doesn't mean we can't have ideas about that as this plan congeals, but I think it's really imperative on them to come back and tell us the tactics required to do those strategies are going to take us X, Y, or Z incremental people, funds, or other aspects. So again, a reminder, maybe a little patronizing, sorry, but I think it's important that we stay focused in the middle of this and make sure that we're providing that guidance to the staff that they can go forward with it.
I don't think this is patronizing.
Okay.
It's all good background.
All right, okay. Last week or 2 weeks ago, I can't remember now because one goes into the next one so quickly, but Joe and I and Mary Zell had the opportunity to attend a conference down in Charlotte that involved other science museums. And in particular, Joe and I spent an entire day meeting with other museum directors and trustees and went through a series of sessions that helped to bring new ideas, helped to bring some data, some great opportunities to have discussions about what's working where. And the discussion was quite strategic. So, and it really was a great opportunity to start the mind thinking as we went into this plan, right? We heard from people with museums smaller than ours and museums larger than ours, as far away as Puerto Rico or in Canada and East Coast to West Coast. And the one thing that was clear was that everybody's really excited about getting it right. And everybody knows that they could find a better way to optimize how their board interacts with their staff. So I found it very useful in how Joe and I will interact. I think it also allowed me to think more in depth about this process, and so some of that's incorporated in the discussion that we'll have here. So as we go forward to try to build this plan, obviously we've got to have the inputs from different people. So I try to sort of lay out here, some of those things, but the first thing we've got to think about are the purposes, which we've just talked about. The second thing is, where are we? And I think this was a big piece of our discussion in Charlotte. Where is the environment we're in? How has it changed in the last 2 years? How do we see it changing in the next 5 to 10 years from so many different perspectives, not only in terms of the internal staff and hiring and recruiting and all the things that you have to do, but all the external factors of how your government is going to either be able to fund or not be able to fund you. How are the demographics of your area impacting you? How is the political environment impacting you? And we know that's the case in this state for sure, right? What other cultural aspects are important to us, and even more so now, we're taking all of these and multiplying them by 2, right? Because we've got Martinsville and data. And speculating to an extent, because I don't think anybody's predicting the economy of Martinsville in 2025 to 2030 right now. They may be looking at tomorrow or the next week or a year out, but I think that we really have to be thinking about all those pieces, and without those together, I think we're not taking the right first step. We talked a lot in Charlotte as well about the community of people that we serve, and as we look at the 2 communities that we're in, these are not economic juggernauts, right? These are communities that are having a really tough time. And we've got to make sure that our plans and the way we're approaching those are relevant to them. From that part of our purposes that serves the outward community rather than, let's say, just the RNC, right? So I think all these things together, as Joe had pointed out to me, and we'll talk about it in terms of the constituencies below, from a political perspective, we've got to think about what's going to be going on after the next election. And, every governor certainly has their approach, right? And we know one thing's for sure, we will have a new governor, because by law we will, right? So we need to be thinking about those kinds of things. So I'm not sure at this point, but I think what I'd like us to do is sort of think about how we might go after some of this on a macro basis, and collect some of this information. I think some of it we may have, some of it we may be looking for other sources. We have some data that we're going to try to collect from the association we just met with, just try to help us to see what's going on elsewhere, because there's a lot of learning from other people that have made mistakes and figured out how to fix them. That's helpful. I'd rather do it on their time than ours. But I think all those things are important. Any real question about that piece?
Is there a digital version of this that's available?
Yes.
I don't recall getting it.
No,
so-
you didn't, because I just finished last
Okay,
night.
I'd love to have one for the
Yeah.
record.
Yeah,
so,
got it.
Thank you.
Happy
I
to
will
do
email
that.
it to you right now.
We'll send it to you right now.
Okay.
They have it, because they got it before you.
I gathered that.
All right, from the constituency standpoint, this is where the inputs, I think, are super important, and I'm not sure how that's been done in the past, so I'd like that to be part of our discussion here, but clearly we want to ask these constituencies in some way, shape, or form what their thoughts are on what the bigger strategies that they see are relevant to our business going forward and to our agency, and how that can be incorporated into the plan or thought through and prioritized. So, and obviously, all these people should have some say. Obviously, employees can be counted upon to speak up. And I mean, from the community and the customers, some of that we're going to learn from just the experience we've had in interacting with them. We know a little bit about that, but I'm not sure. I'm sure there are other ways we could solicit some information. I think from, Art, you could speak to from an academic standpoint, from the people who participate with our folks, with our curators, curation staff, and with the whole staff that deals with RNC, how we might seek out what, the academics that interact would feel is important for us to look at different strategies. Foundation, yep.
I don't want to interrupt your
Yeah.
flow, but I think some of these should be formal.
Yep.
Like for the board, we had an offsite last time where we talked about the strategic plan. I think something like that, an offsite. For the employees, I think we should have a forum where we
Yep.
sit down and talk with the employees. Hey, what do you think we should be doing over the next 5 to 10 years? I'm not sure academia, maybe Art or somebody is better to talk about
Yeah.
that, but I think some of these should be formal, where we have a specific meeting with the constituency to talk about what we think should be in the plan.
group
Yeah,
session.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's great. That's what I'm looking for, actually. Yeah.
yeah.
I would like to say that we do have some formal avenues, but not for everything here.
Yeah.
That's something
I'm
we can
okay with
certainly
not
work
for
on.
everything, but staff should have a dedicated, the board should have a dedicated session, I think.
Yep.
And one thing we did during the previous strategic plan was we did hold community meetings. So people came over for lunch, we took minutes, we had the break into small groups, did the World Cafe format of discussion, and I thought that worked out really well. And we can certainly apply that model, if we want to other constituencies as well.
We
No, I
had a
think it's great.
facilitator, I think, for the board offsite.
Yes, we did.
And I think that was really helpful.
Did we?
Did we? Wait a second.
I feel like we did, when we were all in a room with charts.
Well, I think
and
Joe-
stickies.
Yeah,
I think Joe facilitated.
Was that you facilitating?
Well, I had everyone break down into the
Okay.
different
Different
rooms and
groups,
rotate.
yeah, different rooms,
Okay.
rotated.
Okay.
And it was
yeah.
Carol who was playing host over at that farmhouse.
Okay.
that came
Right.
with-
I think that's
I
the
forget
kind
what
of
it's
thing
called.
that's helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think we could do, I think some of this homework can come into it beforehand
Yeah.
to make it more
Yes,
to make it even
yes.
more focused.
Yes, people can do report outs, hey, here's what we heard from academia, here's what we heard from the community.
Since I seem to be the voice for academia, the Research and Collections Committee, the curators and their staff are always welcome at those meetings, and I take my cues from them. So they have an opportunity to certainly to talk about things like expansion for collection space and that sort of thing, which I hope will become part of what we do in the next 5 years and beyond. But I look to them for their input, and that's a venue that is available quarterly, and certainly we can expand upon that. But in terms of their needs and future prospects, I take all my cues from them.
Yeah, I was actually thinking, I was actually including them more on the employees side of that, and they could be separate, a separate piece of it. I'm thinking more of, when we look at the purposes that were laid out, it's more statewide and where it might be a little bit wider than statewide, and we have so many relationships that are beyond there that maybe it's, maybe the forum is, a questionnaire or something that's broad. But I think we need to go a little bit wider, especially as we're now in 2 locations, right? And we want to encourage more other additional universities that aren't participating today. Like my sense was UVA doesn't participate in anything we're doing, or very little, right? I mean, I'm not a UVA-er, but I mean, are they a big participant in stuff that we do?
Offhand, I can't think, outside of research associates, I can't think of a specific.
I don't know, just as an
It's
example.
a way to raise our profile
Yes.
as well by
Yeah.
asking, is kind of what you're saying. Hey,
Yes.
UVA, here's who we are, what do you
Yep.
think?
Yep. And
We
we're
do
gonna
that.
be right on your doorstep.
Yeah.
We do have, I would say in some universities, we have a bigger, for lack of a better word, footprint than others. Joint NSF grant with Howard University, Lynchburg University, the Dinosaur Dig, Virginia Tech, and adjunct positions. So, but certainly not every opportunity has been filled.
Reach out to all of them.
Great, and I wonder, Art, maybe you speak to this, or Joe as well, is it, let's just say we took a questionnaire as being part of that process, maybe that questionnaire that the RNC team that are in the museum today can be a huge part of helping to put that together, because that might push that out a little
I think
bit.
that's a great way to.
Okay.
What about
Find out.
HBCUs? Do we have a relationship with any of the historically black colleges?
What did I just
You
say?
said Howard, but I
Howard.
mean, any Virginia.
But
I
what about
think of
Hampton
Howard
or?
as DC.
Yeah,
I guess
Are
you're
there
right, sure.
Virginia ones?
You got 2 right here. I
Yeah.
mean, we could send the same questionnaire, I would
Yeah.
I
think.
think we should.
Yeah,
do
I think
that.
we should,
To all of them.
absolutely.
Every college,
Yeah.
yeah.
Especially state-supported ones.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
just all of them in Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I make a
we
quick
got it.
comment here? Because I think for this tool to be super useful, you need to reach out to the right people. And so I agree, this is a conversation, we want it to be more than one way. So going down to curators is key. I agree 1,000%. But right now, a lot of colleges and universities are restructuring. It seems to be a general trend across academe at all levels. So tiny schools to big schools are rethinking models. And so I would encourage you to kind of reach out to deans, like people that are in bigger structural people. And in that tool or letter or whatever it is we're asking, breach the subject of how would you want to structure with us? Put out that kind of olive branch of what kinds of opportunities would you like to establish with an institution like ours? How could we best serve your faculty, staff, and students? Because I think it would be much more telling overall than just kind of reaching out to certain research associates and asking for department chair kinds of concepts. I think it's an opportunity that if you're going to make it worth its most. Because I know right now, like our school is very much looking to find places to connect to and raise their own profiles in unique ways. And so this museum is so wonderful of a place for academics to attach to. It just makes sense to make that to the right person.
Great.
Great idea.
Good, great discussion. That's what I'm hoping to get going here. From the foundation side, obviously we've got participation on the committee, but I think there probably needs to be is, again, a formal discussion. Happy to take care of that. But I think that needs to happen, and we need to move that forward within the timeline we'll talk about. I'm not sure, but I think, obviously we need to be considering our contributors and corporate sponsors. There were some interesting stories from the colleagues that we met a few weeks ago of how the challenge of bringing in corporate sponsors who have their own agendas, and some that may have agendas which are conflicting with our purpose, or edges of our purpose. And one of those examples was one particular operation that was promoting the discussion education around climate change, and then they had a particular corporate sponsor that wanted them to tone it down. And so deciding whether they needed to walk away from that sponsor or look for other alternatives. But again, I think we've got to include some of the key sponsors that are part of our business today. What's working for them, what isn't, what can help it work more. Really understanding how do we double, triple, quadruple the types of contributions that we get to. And even with target sponsors such as Dominion, like that's a good example. What are you looking for? I mean, what do we need to do to make that happen? Maybe there's a list of 4 or 5 or 6 of these companies, and we go out to them as part of this process and say, hey, this is who we are. This is what we're trying to accomplish. We're here. And we're an essential government function. We'd like you to participate with us, and what does it take, and what are you interested in?
I think that's a great idea. I mean, if you could have a meeting with the head of our foundation easily.
I think it would be, Ryan, I think I'm speaking for you as well here, that we would welcome those discussions that we are accompanied by either members of the Board of Trustees or the Foundation Board of Directors. Because frankly said, I've learned over the years that people don't want to hear another administrator such as myself coming in and saying, I need more money to do more things, right? But to hear a volunteer in the community come and talk about how necessary the particular project that we might be approaching them for is.
I think this is what you're saying, Joe, but I'll say it a different way. I think you need almost a sponsor. Like, if you're going to meet with the head of the Dominion Foundation, you should have me there.
Right.
If you're going to meet with the head of the Capital One Foundation, you should have somebody who has some, connection.
And there have been, historically, there's been the occasional opportunity for a trustee or a foundation board member to accompany us, but Ryan's forever telling me, we've got a meeting with, such and such a bank or something like that. It's like, okay, well, let's go, and it's just the two of us, something like that,
And I think where it makes sense, we think it adds value, bring a legislator. If it's a good size operation, right?
Okay with that.
Yeah. We've got a couple of, friends of the museum, right?
Yeah. And, our legislators that represent Martinsville and Henry County, they will talk to us anytime. We haven't addressed them in that fashion, given them the opportunity to approach us, or approach a potential funder with us. So that would be a new ground. But I will say that they've always been open. They'll take our phone calls as big as we're getting at.
Yeah, and again, this is something just like all the activities that we've been doing for Waynesboro with the legislature. I think it's something that's really well planned out and buttoned up for everybody.
I think having a pre-planning or pre-strategy meeting is important too. Like, I think bringing a legislator to meet with our foundation head would be not a good idea.
Okay.
I think the tactic is Waynesboro because that's our service territory, not Martinsville. So, I mean, I think having like a pre-strategy meeting for each is important.
Good.
And it'd be different for
No, it's
everyone,
good.
the
That's
way
good
you
insight.
do it.
Yeah, no, that's good.
But insider knowledge.
Right. Yep. Great. Any other thoughts there? Okay, from the trustees, obviously we'll do some sort of a dedicated event of some kind, but I think we want to get some of the first parts of this, the 1s and 2s and 3s, a little bit of that input in there first, so that we're at least not counting on the board to come back and create those things. I think that would be very useful to set that stage. We don't know what the new governor down the road's express plans are. We know what the current one is, but I mean, that's, that's just something we want to keep out there as part of our process, and maybe that's part of the review. What other constituencies are we missing here that we haven't talked about? Any other constituencies? Cord, Ryan, anybody? Roberto's got, I'm sure Roberto, yep.
Just from a, I'll admit I'm wearing two hats here, so every now and then some of my comments will be tinged with the back of my head knowing about the whole accreditation stuff that we were given in the past and will need to address going forward. Within that, the category of being a statewide resource and concerns of, how people outside of the immediate area know and visit us, and the check mark for Waynesboro being an extension to expand across the state. But then that leaves, if we were doing market research on our reputation or awareness, if you grabbed a sample of 1,000 Virginians across the state, so how many would know who we are? How many have visited us? How many have visited us more than once? How many have not visited us at all? And why is that? So there's an aspect of trying to find out the people who we don't know us. It's everybody we've mentioned kind of knows us to some extent, but then there's okay, who doesn't know us, and why haven't they visited, and why don't they know us? So that might be some insights that we got to figure out maybe how to find if we haven't already. Off the top of my head, I can't remember if in our surveys we say, have you visited us before? Is this your X time visiting the museum kind of a thing? But it's the voice of the folks who may not know us or may want to know us, and there's some reason why they don't know us. And how would we theoretically address that, considering that we're supposed to be a statewide resource?
Okay. Great.
I have some other categories
Good.
too. Educators. I mean, I academia I think of as
Yep.
colleges, but we do a lot of work with
Yes.
high schools and others. I think educators.
Yep, good point. Great.
I don't know how informative it is, but neighbors. I mean, community is very large. Are we
Yeah.
going to talk to Waynesboro? Or are we going to talk to Martinsville? I assume they're included in community, but I think
Yep.
we should talk to our local governments.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily mean our next door neighbors, but
Yeah, I know what you mean, yep.
Our peers. Shouldn't we sort of benchmark with
Yes.
some peers and say, hey, well, what's in your 5-year plan? Should it be in ours? I mean, I don't know, what 5 or 6 peers?
Like all the museums.
The other museums, yeah, what are they doing? Is there
Well, I mean-
something we want to steal or something we want to totally avoid?
Not embarrassing Joe, but I tell you what, going through that meeting, everybody knows Joe.
Yeah.
And so there's plenty of people, I'm sure, that are willing to share.
You may already have done this, but is there anything we want to steal or?
Especially
I don't know.
future, what are they thinking about that
Exactly,
we're
what's in
not
there?
thinking about?
Exactly, so educators, neighbors, peers, and by neighbors, I mean local governments. And then nonprofits, I don't know about this one, but are there nonprofits we should partner with? Maybe we already do?
Yeah.
That's a no?
Mostly
I got a yes
mostly
and a
from a
no.
parasitic standpoint.
Oh.
And look at our community though, right? Now, I'm not talking broadly across
Yeah.
Virginia, but we have an embarrassment of resources at our disposal compared to so many nonprofits in Martinsville, Henry County, and surrounding communities. And as such, I think, Jonathan, Ryan, anyone jumped in, but I think we're always willing to help, sometimes maybe to a fault. And so, for instance, Jonathan was smart. He goes and he invests some money into buying a stage that we've been renting out and making some money on. Okay, great. The problem is every nonprofit that has no money that needs a stage comes to us, and we probably got ourselves jammed up a few times with that. So yeah, I think nonprofits were, unless you're talking about something specific like a
I was
statewide.
talking
Non-conflicting nonprofits.
Yeah,
right.
I don't know. If you met with, I'm making this up, the Environmental Defense Fund and said, hey, what do you think museums like ours should do? Would that be helpful or not? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I'm just throwing it
We've
out
talked
there.
to Chesapeake Bay Foundation.
Yeah, I mean, maybe
Yeah.
they're one. I
So,
don't
yeah.
know.
It's a good thought. It's a good thought.
It's a brainstorm.
Yeah, nonprofits that have more of a direct link to the type of
Yes,
mission
yes.
that the museum has.
Yeah.
Not necessarily looking for a handout from the museum,
Yeah.
or assistance from
No,
the
local, maybe national.
There are also professional groups, so, you
Yeah.
know, Black, Hispanic, Asian engineers and people of that ilk. There's employee resource group within the corporations that are many times looking for either corporate outlets to get involved with or opportunities to get their children exposed to STEM.
STEM,
So
yeah, related.
there's a wide net beyond just the community-based help groups. There's also the
Have to be
professional groups.
strategic.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, well, yeah, like
Yeah,
educators,
definitely.
BEA, I mean,
Yeah,
things like
yeah.
that, yeah.
Right.
Be strategic.
Yeah.
But maybe they're a group we've overlooked. I don't know.
Great discussion, thank you. So, what we end up with here at the end of three, of the first 3 points, is a whole lot of input, right? And then we get to a point where we've got to decide which one of these do we really want to do, and then, so the next couple of points are really about what happens, once we've done 1, 2, 3. We start to think about how that impacts the financial and human resources of the organization, and what we might push out or pull in. Wow, that's a great idea. We should really be doing some of that now. And what could we sacrifice to do that? So I think it becomes its own discussion, but it's not. It is really something that's done once we decide what is important from these constituencies. What is the board's chosen from these various inputs to say this is what we really want to do, or maybe we want to do 8 of these 10 things, and we're not going to decide until we figure out what those financial and human resources are going to be. But I don't want to put the cart before the horse, I guess is what I'm saying. And as Joe mentioned before, we got stuff that is not going to end at this 5-year plan. Waynesboro being a great example of that. So we have to factor that in. That has to be a continuing part of a very important part of our strategy and objectives. We're going to talk in a minute about the timeline. We certainly want to get to understanding, measurable objectives. We want to get to a point where this committee has reviewed the inputs and then be able, I think the job of this committee, unless I hear differently from this group, is to review these inputs and really make a recommendation to the board of, here are the top ones. Maybe there are some that, we really are looking for guidance on more than others. Here are some choices of others, but not everything. I don't know. I mean, I'd like that to be a discussion. Do we present everything, or do we say these are the ones that we feel match our charter and match our capabilities best, and leave them to choose between a couple of alternatives?
I think you really have to have the human and financial resource implications known for those two.
Yes.
Then you can prioritize what really makes sense
Right.
in that time frame, knowing that you already got some carryovers that are going to probably take up a lot of those resources.
Yeah.
I love that we have so many people here today, but traditionally we've had a couple people here. I don't think it should be up to a couple of people
No.
to give the Board of Trustees
Right.
option A or option B.
Okay.
So if there are a bunch of us, maybe, but if not, I think the Board of Trustees should be presented with all the options and decide. So I think it
that's
just
fine.
depends on how active this committee can stay and be, because otherwise I think we're disenfranchising a lot of people.
Yeah, okay, I think that's great. The only concern I would have is that in order to do point 4, we're gonna need a lot of in the dirt work, right? If we're trying to value out and resource all those things. So we may have to cull some of it away, because otherwise we're gonna be asking for a lot of work during and middle of a reaccreditation and other things that are ongoing right now. So, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. God help us if we've got so many great ideas, that's wonderful, Any
Mark?
thoughts?
I got one.
Go ahead.
I like the fact of putting everything out there to people, especially to the board. And one of the reasons I say that is because the fewer things that we put out there as a board as a whole, they may look at this and go, I really don't fit in anywhere there. That's not in my expertise. But if you put the whole thing out there, you may have one or two that'll go, man, number 3 is right up my alley. They'll spearhead it and get behind it. And it may leave space for other people to go to something else. But when we take away what we're offering, now you've got people like me. When I first started on the board, I mean, it takes a year just to get involved and figure out what you can do. So if we limit what we put out there, then we may have board members sitting back going, well, I really don't fit in there very well. And then they wait on Joe or Ryan or somebody to say, hey, would you like to try this or like to do that? So I like the fact of putting everything out there and let's see where it goes. And like you said, if we have to call a couple of things at that point, then we do, but at least we've given them all the information too.
I think that's great. Good.
And you don't have to, you can do it in phases. I mean, the board doesn't have to see everything fully fleshed out to make a decision. You can say, here are the 20 ideas. Which 10 board do you think we should?
Take to the next stage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's fair. That's great discussion. Barbara, I saw you did a comment out there. Can you use something you want to say? Thought I saw her.
She said also don't limit the options.
Okay, all right.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't read it.
Yeah.
All right,
Chat
limit the
comment.
option. Okay, Roberta?
Yeah, I was going to say the same. There's a lot of wiggle room that we can create to put a stake in the ground. So if there's, at some point along the way, we could have said, oh, we need to explore what drones are going to do to our environment, or we need to explore how is AI going to affect, blah, blah, blah. So just the fact that we're putting stakeholders on the ground, stakes in the ground to something that needs to be explored kind of gives a starting point for whoever comes after us to say, oh yeah, the folks before us said this was coming down the pike. We'd better figure out how we're going to address this now because AI is crawling up our shorts right now. It's that kind of a thing.
Yeah, good point. Awesome. Okay, good. That's really great discussion. One of the other things in point 6, it was brought up before, but we'll talk about it a little bit more detail. As part of the reaccreditation process, strategic plan is a specific line item in that process. And so the timing of how we get to whatever stage we're at the time that's required, and as I understood it from Joe, I think that's sometime around November. It was due in the fall of next year, right?
So November of next year, we will submit our self-study to AMs. This is a large comprehensive document of our operations. Then the following spring, which would be around March 2025, we'll have a site visit. And at that point, we have peer reviewers who look not only at our self-study, but at our operation, and they do a deep dive. Then they create a recommendation that goes to the AAM Reaccreditation Board, which would meet in summer of 2025, right about the time that the current strategic plan ends. So my point of saying all that is that I'm going to make the recommendation to the board that not only do we have Museum Without Walls 20 to 2025, we should have a draft of the next strategic plan ready for AM reaccreditation so they can see what we're doing in the future.
But that draft could be unapproved at this point.
Year and a half from now.
So we should submit in November of 2024 our self-study that will have the current strategic plan.
A year.
Yeah. But a year and a half from then,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, a year and a half from now is when we'll have the site visit and the eventual decision made. We should, at that point, when the site visit occurs, we should be passing out drafts of our new strategic plan.
Yeah.
So summer 20.
Right.
25.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that is what takes us really to the next page in the process, right? So, and I haven't included everything in here. Obviously, we're starting today. I'm just gonna, as a normal strat committee during the Board of Trustees meeting, I'll just say, look, we talked about process, we're considering X, Y, and Z as we go through this, and I'm not gonna go into a lot of detail, but at this point, just to let them know that we've met, we know we're on the path and we're working it, right? That the middle of the chart really is the meat of all the things that have to happen. What I'm gonna add, based on our discussion this morning, is sometime between now and, let's call it the end of the year, let's call it maybe the end of November, I'll at least put together with the notes, I think Mary Zell's taking a little bit of notes over there, maybe the constituencies and the formats of discussions that will go forward. And then we can start to, maybe I'll have some side discussions with various folks about who want to help on this committee to try to carry some of these forward. So that we at least get that, we gotta get that process started, right? I don't know whether the committee wants to look at that first, even in a email format first, before we start that collection of inputs. Because I think we need to think about how we, the types of questions we want to ask. And we want to be broad enough that we're not guiding people down our path, but we don't want it to go off into left field, right?
You almost have to work backwards,
Yeah.
when are
So-
our meetings next year? Do we have a fall?
So if we go to the far side, that we have to have, the plan kicks off June 1 or May 1, 2025?
June 1.
June 1, all right? So, our board meets in what, February? So I'm saying that we should, November 2024 is when the plan should be agreed by the board, because I think the staff needs from November to June, and maybe that's not even enough time to say, some of that's been fleshed out, to say, God, we gotta get ready for this.
But then you do the strategic offsite at the fall meeting. Do we have a fall meeting? Do we have we have an
No,
August meeting?
No, yeah, we have August and November of next year.
So August maybe?
Probably would have to be the August meeting.
Yeah,
wouldn't it
so
be?
you can have it all written up by November.
Right.
The vote in November.
So a possible retreat in August of 2024?
I mean, I'm just working backwards.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's what I want, that's the discussion I want to have.
And then we all vote on it in November, after we've had a chance to look at it.
Right,
So we've got until July-ish to gather all the inputs.
right.
It's a pretty tight timeline. That's why I want to get at least this much agreed.
Make
think
sure
that-
the August offsite has air conditioning.
Yeah, and it's typically been a difficult one to get people to, right? So, hasn't it?
Yeah, summer, so people are traveling. But it is what it is.
What if you pushed it till the
Yeah.
beginning of September, when everybody's back on their normal
School,
schedule in
yeah.
school?
Mary
Is
Zell,
there a
make a
reason
note
it
of that.
has to be August?
No, there is nothing that says that you have to meet, the only thing it says in the law
Once
is
a
you
year.
have to meet once a year.
Once a year.
So when we meet is just a matter of tradition, so we
Yeah.
can't.
Why
in
not move it to
September.
the August, so September to have
Sure.
better attendance?
Yep,
Give it a
let's
go.
do that. Yay.
We'll still
Not
have-
Labor Day weekend.
Right.
Right.
We'll still
Not a
have air
holiday
conditioning.
weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know
remember,
what?
We'll still have air conditioning.
Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, you have better attendance that way.
yep. Any other thoughts in general? I think on the timeline, I think we can, as I try to put something together, I'll try and see when is our board meeting? It's November what?
It's 18th.
18th?
Yes.
Maybe before then, so at least maybe we can circulate it amongst ourselves, and just say, this makes sense.
You just send whatever you want to me, and then I'll blind carbon copy
Yeah.
everyone, so we stay within FOIA.
I don't.
I do think, you mentioned this, but I do think this is an awful lot for you. So if you end up saying X, you're in charge of getting educators' input or coordinating, and X, you're in charge of getting corporate donor. And
Yeah.
that might be helpful if you deputize.
I can definitely do that, but I would really appreciate from the group that's here and on the screen in front of us, if there is anything in particular in these inputs or constituencies that attracts you, then we'd really appreciate volunteering to me. That would be great.
I wanted to add, we as staff can help for any deliverables that the board would like, booklets or any kind of materials that go with this, we can try to incorporate that into the schedule as well.
Creatively, it would be really good to start thinking about that. You know, I hadn't thought about that, but that's really attractive, even if it's a simple PDF piece. I think, you know, this annual report is such a great document. It's a nice one to send out. So I think those kinds of things, and then maybe it's a 1-page or 2-page overview of what we're trying to accomplish.
It was real helpful in the last 2 strategic plans. We did have a nice colored glossy item to hand out. It was just a good professional look.
Yep.
We obviously didn't do that with this one. We didn't have any media. It happened during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, when we planned out to start this current one. So we never really did invest in so we can go back to that with ease.
I think the intermediate product you need though is here a 1-pager. Here's what we learned from educators.
Yeah.
Here's what we learned from corporates. Here's what we learned. Those are the intermediate products I think that would be helpful to.
Yep.
Sure.
And maybe that survey that of
So,
questions.
yeah, here's what we learned. Here's
Or what the information we're trying to get from them.
Yeah.
Or input we're trying to get from them.
All right.
And digestible. 'Cause people aren't going to have time to read 50 pages of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's also informal inputs. I mean, there's inputs from, we've got some great legislative friends, if they're still in play after this election, you know, make them feel good about their support they've given us and go, we'd really like your input on our next strategic plan.
Sure.
You know? So, that is really the extent of what I wanted to talk about in terms of the creation of the next 5-year plan. One of the things I wanted to throw out there, and it's, I don't know if it probably is quite meaningful. Is it still a museum without walls, 2025 to 2030, or do we want to go out to the ChatGPT universe and create a new, slogan, or what do we want to do? And has anybody got any sort of thoughts on that? Is there sort of a fun part of this, wrapping up this piece of the discussion today?
I would like this group to consider that question.
Yeah.
And the reason is because I see so many museums now these days adopting the phrase museum without walls.
Yeah.
So it's almost come a little blasé, and I would like to be kind of leading the pack rather than following.
What did it mean in its original incarnation?
Kind of reinventing ourselves as a statewide institution, because when we built the new building, I can't speak to the way it was before, really, but it really seemed like, nobody knew about us. We were kind of keeping our presence within Southern Virginia, and most, not all, but most of our strategies, some of the exceptions being the work that the curators would do statewide and our resident educators in, say, Charlottesville and Tidewater. But I thought those were great successes to build on. And so the Museum Without Walls was something the staff came up with in discussion in 2011-12, somewhere in that time frame. But I think it might be time to consider, there's something to be said about branding, keeping your brand and consistency. I think that should be discussed. But at the same time too, since so many other museums, it's so common I pick up a strategic plan at another museum and it uses the phrase in there, we want to become a museum without walls. Even the quote unquote Children's Museum of Waynesboro, right, which doesn't actually have a facility, right? They're kind of more of a concept. They started using the tagline museum without walls.
There's just, we're looking at the future. 2025 to 2030, so many things are going to be different. We've got to be focused on something that's attracting a different demographic with that slogan as well. What is that demographic, and how do we make that work? And we don't have to go spend a bunch of money with a marketing company to do that. AI is wonderful for this specific kind of stuff. You could generate 50 ideas in 5 minutes.
Do you want to make that homework for the next strategic planning meeting? Everyone come with
I think you could do that, or we could say what I think. It's harder to do that without some of the key top projects understood, because if it's more research focused, or if it's more education focused or if it's more physical facility focused. I mean, one of the things we heard in Charlotte, these meetings was, the importance of, what, the omni approach to all the different things, all the different ways we catch people, right? As a consumer products guy, I talk about omni-channel. I'm selling in e-commerce, I'm selling in brick and mortar, I'm selling, at the corner store. But if we're selling in so many different places, how do we articulate that that is our strategy? That's probably the biggest input I got. One of the bigger inputs out of that meeting, Joe, is the importance of don't forget about where you're going and how most people are not they're not coming to the physical presence.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So the question I'm hearing, which is a long-term one, is okay, we've got our main facility. Let's say in the best case scenario, Waynesburg is up and running perfectly. Okay, we got 2 physical spots. What's next? How are we addressing the rest of the state with these 2 physical spots?
Yep.
Well, remember last meeting, Joe mentioned that we are at 100% capacity for collections. So I don't think there's any way to get around it. We have to consider how to expand our collections capacity, whether we do that through Douglas Avenue or the accession of a building next door. That needs to be part of the discussion in order to meet our mandate. I'm not saying it's the only thing, but we've certainly used up a lot of political capital for Waynesboro, and to have a capital campaign for a major space is going to be a stiff ask. So I think we need to look strategically at the spaces we do have available and how to use them and how we can grow the collections into the future, the storage space for collections.
How long until, or reasonable is it to think that the building we're fixing up, Douglas Avenue, could be that?
Could be operational.
I mean, will it eventually be able to hold collections once we fix it up?
That's the goal. So if we do.
Is it soon enough? Is it?
Well, the accreditation process, I remember that's what came up in the last discussion, is the condition of Douglas Avenue was one of the things that was a strike against us. Mm-hmm. So, bringing that up to speed, but then the question still remains, what portions of that building are usable for collections? And, there hasn't been I think there needs to be a hard look at where we are in terms of collections, how Douglas Avenue might address that. And then if it doesn't in some way, part of our strategic plan needs to be, how do we address collection growth?
So the goal right now is that if approximately with the start of the next fiscal year, if we get a contractor to do the remainder of the work, it should take about 1.5 years. So that puts us at say January 2026. Approximately.
To get the work done.
To get the work done.
Right.
And then at that point, the building can be used. In fact, one of the things that we've been talking about is how do we ensure that the old collections area on the lower level is, what am I trying to say? In the condition that it's going to hold the proper environment. And that's where we're going to get some recommendations. So do we need to put, insulation up on those walls, or is the HVAC itself going to be enough, and so forth? And then, it's going to be then, the strategic question of what collections live over there and what lives in Starling Avenue.
Yep. And, not to go too much into the details of it, but I mean, really, it's essentially, what do we need to do for that to last through the next 5-year plan? Will it take us to 2030?
And is that enough?
Is that enough to carry this plan, or do we need another one? Or
well, as we recognize,
what other options?
There are things that are going to go beyond that 5 years, and this is going to be an ongoing thing with the
right
museum.
From a space. I get from a space perspective. Again, when we get closer into 2030, then we're going to be thinking about out the next 5 years, right? And, well, somebody will. I don't think any of us will. Maybe these guys, but okay, good discussion. That's the kind of stuff we need to be thinking about. So. All right, and that's all I had on the framework going forward. Does anybody else have any comments? If you do, please share them, or if you want to just send those as notes to Mary Zell to add into the discussion, that would be helpful.
Thrilled we're getting started.
Yeah, it's a nice way we got to get started. So,
Speaking of getting started,
yeah,
I'm gonna eat.
yeah. So
So,
I feel bad. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. Okay. 10-minute break. Is 10 minutes good? All right. So we'll see you at 45 after. But you can watch us. Go ahead.
I do have.
Yeah, watch you. Oh.
I think they're all there though still.
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
I think the introverts have been flourishing during this time.
I know, and us extroverts have been
As
struggling.
an introvert, I've certainly been flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
I know she wanted to get coffee instead.
Okay, in an effort to finish on a timely basis or before, I'm gonna just start back up. We really don't have a lot of additional things to talk about today.
There is some stronger stuff around the corner.
Well, all right. Pardon me.
That's all right. So what I'd like to do is open up the discussion, because this committee hasn't met in a while and has got new members, and just want to make sure that everybody is comfortable with sort of the process that we're heading down, and if there were other questions about committee business or any new business, that we brought them up and we're able to discuss them as a group, and certainly open to new ideas. I'm the rookie in this chair, so I'm very happy to get input as to what other things you would like to see us talking about that relate to our, let's call it our own individual charter, and see what else we can do. So I'll leave that open to everybody else but me. I've
One
talked
of
it
the
up.
things this committee has done in the past couple years is focus on DE&I and C, diversity, equity, inclusion, making our exhibits more inclusive. We have had our first diverse intern this summer. I think that's important because it's not really taken up anywhere else in the committee structure. I don't have any immediate action items in mind. I just would like us to continue to bring it up each meeting and say, hey, is there anything new happening, or have we made progress, or are all the exhibits at Waynesboro going to be bilingual or whatever? I just think checking in on that is important.
That's a great one, and it's got to be an input to the strategic plan as well, so I think that's critical. How does that fit into the reaccreditation process?
There is a section, they do take that seriously, so it doesn't have more weight or less weight than anything else, such as, your strategic plan, your finances. Everything in accreditation is, are you operating a museum within the boundaries of best practices, modern best practices? And back when we had our last one, DEA&I was not part of that, so that's part of the reaccreditation revision from some years back.
Do we have statewide targets? Do we have any targets? How do we measure, or how do we think we should measure our progress on DEI? Or is that a question for the group to try to figure out?
I would like the group to weigh in on it, because I think it was a pandemic Zoomed board meeting. I made the specific request, the staff is gonna need marching orders, right? We did get together, myself, Ryan, Jonathan, I can't remember who else in the staff, it's like, what do we do to try to be as inclusive as possible and to make everything as accessible and make people feel safe and comfortable? Whether they visit the museum or engage in a program offsite or whatever. The laundry list is extensive, but I think we need to more formalize it. We've honestly, as far as the state goes, a few years ago, the state had a general outline of a DEI statement. We copied it, put our name on it, but I didn't feel that was, adequate. So I think what we can do is we can share with the strategic planning committee this laundry list. I think we can share the verbiage within the AAM self-study, what they're looking for.
Good.
And then with that, it can be a discussion point in the future, but I would still hold that, myself included, we as staff are kind of looking for some expert guidance from the outside, that is from the boards.
Good.
That's really good to hear. But there is no state requirement. Okay, I think the other thing that comes into play there is when and if we're in open board positions, state of play, is there a mechanism for us to have that discussion with the appropriate governor's office of appointments, and so that they are making sure that's part of our approach and how they bring that into play, right? So
Yeah.
we're getting close, I think, on a couple of terms that are ending. So that might be, is that, I'm not telling you to do, I just say, does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Any other thoughts?
Makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, the Office of Appointments has often been very receptive. They, of course, frankly said, at least quietly have their own agenda, but they do look for input and so forth. And we do have a nominations committee that normally looks at board officers, right? But it is not unprecedented that they might discuss approaching someone to put their application in for being a trustee.
Good. Good, because, you're not adding a lot of staff, so it's, at this point, that makes it a little bit difficult for you to change your numbers. So.
Yeah, I'd say is having been on other commissions at times where we were having blatantly missing skill sets or demographic sets, I think it's up to us to also be vocal and at times maybe a little pushy if we recognize that something is missing and we need it to have for the proper balance of the board, that we get somewhat prescriptive in telling the folks over at appointments that, hey, we need, a purple-haired Martian who speaks Swahili on the board because we don't have one, or, whatever the reasons are, else we run the risk of whoever we get being just political appointment. I'll stop there.
Okay. Good. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's, any other new business, any other comments about things we want to try to cover in this committee, or are there any other thoughts, Joe, of what the committee had done in the past that I may not be aware of, that, or Roberta, you maybe too, because you were involved before, that we need to focus on in the near term as we're going to the next meeting?
The only area that I got curious about, because we're talking about some pretty important decisions that we're going to have to make down the line, and we have limited resources and money, obviously. And within my time, we've had a limited amount of major decisions that we had to make. So as we go through this process, we're obviously, one of the things we said right off the bat, we're going to have to figure out, okay, what are the top 6? And, the rest of the stuff has to go in placeholders or whatever. But what, as a team, as a sub team and as a general team, what will be our decision-making process or prioritization process? Or, if anybody had any thoughts on that, because sooner or later, we're going to get to a discussion of, okay, we really like A and B, but we can't have them both. So what do we do here? I'm just curious how, some major decisions in the past might have been made, or if we're going to have any ground rules on, how far we go in trying to slice and dice when we know we only have limited resources and time, and we need to get the priorities straight. How will we set those priorities? I just, just throwing it out there, spitball, if anybody has any top of mind.
So in the beginning of the discussion, I think one of the things that came to mind from my perspective was, if we had something everybody really wanted to do, but we just, financially we couldn't do it, or we know it's going to take 2 years to find the right people to help us to do that, then we need to make sure that as a function of the plan that gets moved out, so that maybe it is in year 4 of the 5 years and it's known there, and then the objective is set as such, so that the work that's done in years 1 through 3 is leading us to there. And that work could be, we got to do 3 years of serious fundraising or finding, a sponsor to help us with this. I mean, that's the only thing I can see immediately that could allow us to do that.
For a strategic plan, though, there's obviously going to be some things that are going to go beyond the 5 years.
Yep.
And they'll have to be part of the strategic plan in the next 5 years, and maybe the next 5 years. I mean, if we had decided that Waynesboro had to be done in 5 years, it wouldn't have gotten done. It would have kept getting put off. But people recognized that it was a long-term goal, and so that still remains a valid part of. So maybe what we're looking at is identifying certain things as long-term versus things that are achievable in 5 years or 10 years. But something shouldn't be dismissed because it won't be completed in 5 or 10 years. There, like you said, we're looking at big picture stuff here. So,
And Canopy Walk's another example, right? I mean, it's in there for this current 5 year, but it's, gonna have some funding challenges.
Yeah. And also to speak to one point of Roberto's comment, it's been my experience that when you do strategic planning and with the goal of developing a document that becomes your guiding star, you can develop enough projects for 20 years, right? Just sitting there. And so you don't want to try to cram all that in. So if you have to cull anything, it goes back to what I said before. You revert back to the code of Virginia. And then if you want to go deeper, you look at our charter documents and what we're supposed to be doing, and that should provide us with some sense of what percolates to the top priority-wise and other things that are nice to do, but, maybe don't really touch as heavily on the code and the charter documents.
Yeah, but I would also, to Art's point, I would hate to miss an opportunity to think about the next Waynesboro, whether it's a new facility or the other big, huge, $50 million projects. I'd hate to have those disappear.
Well,
just because,
I don't think they will. I mean, I don't recall giant controversies last time.
Okay, good.
I mean, I think we met, we had our offsite, we brainstormed,
Awesome.
And those things become, this first 5 years, you're in a planning phase.
Yep.
You know,
That's fine.
all of them are gonna be in a
That's
different
great.
phase, probably.
And since you brought it up, Mark, I'll remind everyone that, I kind of brought up just, in thinking of the future, that, when you look at our festivals, right? And this even also speaks to research and collection, because that side of the museum is jammed, it's jam-packed. But when you look at things like our festivals and our visitation, we have outgrown the size of our building, maybe even the property, arguably, right? All that said, I think the museum has to consider at some point in the future, and this is really a board level decision, as to what do we do with the existing building? Do we expand it, for instance? And I know Art's right, there is a real estate opportunity kind of,
In front of us.
yeah, almost.
Yeah.
Right, and so forth, but also, the idea of a very traditional way of doing business in the museum world is to build a wing, right? Now, you don't build a wing just to build a wing, right? We have to look exactly what we have. We're, averaging X number of people, and the fire code says we can only have so many in the building at one time, and so forth. So I'm just want to keep that in the crosshairs.
That's really positive. In the spirit of timeliness, any other new business? If not, I'm going to adjourn. It's 12:59 according to this clock in front of me, and we had a 1 o'clock stop, and I see some people collecting up papers. So, any other comments, thoughts? If not, we will see some, if not all of you, in Stanton in a few weeks' time. So thank you very much to everyone for their participation. Really good participation today. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Roberto. Thanks, Cord.
Thanks, Bill.
Bill. Staff. We really appreciate it. We'll talk soon. Barbara's over here using icons. That's awesome.
Great.